Okay, prosecution's opening statement. We got a lot to cover. Got some special segments from the 12 to 3 hour. Let me bring on my awesome guest, Latonia Hines, out of there, Marietta, Georgia. How you doing, Latonia? Still assistant prosecutor and expert in criminal law.
Yes, it's so good to see you. This has been a crazy case. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. And the facts behind it.
It has been, definitely. Let me bring on my other great guest. I think he's still there. Hashtag 4041, my man, Gene Rossi. Gene, you're still with us?
I am here. I'm here.
Okay, yeah. So, like Latonia was just saying, this is a crazy, twisted tale of two couples that knew each other since high school, through college, through marriage, through kids, and then all of a sudden their two start cheating on their other spouses, and ultimately the victim is killed by Brian Winchester. 18 years later, Winchester comes forward with a confession based on a domestic violence scenario that went on with his then wife, the victim's former wife, whom he later married, and he pins her and says, I did it, but we planned and plotted it together. In fact, Winchester sold him the 3 life insurance policies that she collected on. Gene Rossi, it's a guilty verdict here. A lot of people didn't think that was going to happen, but I think that there was supporting evidence throughout all of this, especially with regard to her statements. What are your thoughts now that we're on the back end of the case?
First off, the guilty verdict, I got to tell you, I would not have said it was a slam dunk. I thought there was a little bit of reasonable doubt because lack of DNA. But the guilty verdict came back. I fully understand why they found that. What I want to say is, and going back to your other guest, Latonia, this fact pattern could be a documentary. It could be a made-for-TV movie. And like what you just said in the beginning, I have never seen or been involved in a case this bizarre.
Right. Latonia, what are your thoughts in general about it? Have you ever witnessed anything like it? I mean, I've had some pretty twisted domestic violence murder cases, but this was really deep in the area of the lack of trust and betrayal, and the motives as to why they supposedly did this were essentially, we just didn't want to go through a divorce and have a custody battle.
Oh, it's absolutely insane. And we will see this at some point in time, whether or not it's Lifetime or whatever. There will be some type of fictional portrayal of this. And the depth of the intricacy of the relationships, insane. But we got to go back to the $1.75 million life insurance policy. That's one thing that a lot of people can understand. Money is the root of all of this.
Yeah, and the craziness of this is while this relationship is going on and they're cheating on one another, that Brian Winchester, who's cheating now on his best friend, is actually taking counsel and advice when his best friend Mike Williams is telling him about the problems in the marriage. Brian Winchester's selling him insurance policies, and then Brian Winchester tries to drown him, and when that doesn't work, shoots him in the face. Gene, I mean, the motivations are money, but also just seems like to be a just complete callous disregard. I've never witnessed anything as twisted and bizarre as this, and then ultimately they marry one another, and it all breaks based on some great police work 18 years later.
Brian Winchester is a cold, calculated killer, and Denise Williams is as greedy as a day is long. And they were a match made in heaven. And I was hoping to get back to that opening by the prosecutor. The prosecutor's doing something that another attorney last week did not do, and just got into details about the big vignette is when Mike was killed and how he was killed, the details of that. And he did that in opening, and that was an excellent way to start off your case.
Well, Gene, as you know, many people look at the Law and Crime Network of Dan Abrams' production with regard to trial instructions. It's great for law students. It's great for lawyers, because you're bringing out the point that we were bringing out last week, that the opening statement for the prosecution is key, and you don't just sit there and say, hey, you'll hear it when the witnesses testify. You want to let the jury know right from the get-go what they're about to hear so that they can put it into context. Thank you, Gene. Openings are very important. Let's look at the defense opening in this case.
Now.
All right, that's Denise Williams, defense lawyer, in the opening statement. Latonia, I think that the defense did a very good job in this case. It was a well-thought-out case on both sides. And getting to the point that Gene Rossi was making before, here you see a defense attorney giving real-life specific facts, not talking about the flag and the presumption of innocence and proof beyond a reasonable doubt. He's giving meat on the bone to these jurors. What were your thoughts of the opening?
I thought that they did what they needed to do, which is the fact that the prosecution was going to have a hard time trying to tie together where the conspiracy lied, where there was this meeting of the minds between Denise and Brian for purposes of planning the murder. The fact that they might have had an affair might be something, but the point that the defense attorneys made up, and especially even during the trial with regard to their motions, is that being able to show that she was truly a principal for purposes of the planning of the murder of her husband.
Right,
and so they needed the point.
And Gene, I think to that point, what the defense is trying to show, and it's a good argument to make, is that he has every motive in the world to lie, because he's the one who did it, he's the one who got caught, he's the one who confessed to it. Now he's getting complete immunity from this. He doesn't have to answer for those crimes, and that basically he's trying to get back at Denise Williams because she filed charges against them 18 years later, which precipitated this confession. I think it was a solid job as far as what he had.
It was a solid job. I'm going to give it a B+ and A-, but I want perfection. I don't know if I would have said, he did a great job. I don't care what the verdict was. He did a great job. I would not have said there's no evidence of adultery or in a relationship. I would have embraced that because Brian Winchester was pretty credible on the stand when it came to that. And I would have said, listen, they did have an affair, they did do something improper, but that's different than having your husband killed, and Brian Winchester went renegade. That's right. What I would have argued.
Well, that's a good point, presuming that your client is telling you that. And a lot of times the defense, right?
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of times the defense lawyer is saddled by the either the truth or delusion, depending on which side of the defense you're on. Guys, Brian Winchester is got to be the most dubious, deceitful, horrible guy I've seen as a defendant. That's the state's star witness. We have to break down his testimony, but unfortunately for right now, we're going to take a quick break, pay some bills, but we'll be back with Brian Winchester. Let me put this into context for you. There he is, the hero, Brian Winchester. This guy's best friends with the victim, okay? He is out, all the spouses are out, they're drinking, and then he winds up kissing Mike Williams' wife, and Mike Williams' wife, it should be no surprise, is Denise Williams. They then start a love affair, if you want to call it, an extramarital affair with one another, and this all happened while the spouses, the other spouses, were parking the car at a bar called Floyd's that night. And if you want to take it one step further, and why we think that this is like such a horrific case, is that while he's posing to be Mike's best friend, ultimately killing Mike, he's also in the insurance game. He sells life insurance policies, Brian Winchester. So why not sell some policies to Mike, the guy he's going to kill? Let's take a look. Okay, welcome back. So that's Brian Winchester giving us all the dirty on the planning of this. Latonia, I'm just, you know, I've handled lots of murder cases as a prosecutor, and some premeditated for sure. But the level of premeditation that's gone on here for a year, and all up to and including, like, let's just randomly kill, you know, the other spouse so that we can make it look like an accident. The abject lack of humanity. These are people that had a relationship with one another. They had children with one another. And then Denise apparently backs out of it a little bit and says that, you know, she didn't want him to go, Mike, that being her husband, Mike, who was supposed to be killed. And then he calls Denise and like, what's going on? And it's like, we don't want to be wishy-washy about it. Now, ultimately, we know the plan was executed, but can you explain the inhumanity of this? These people never had a problem in their lives before. Where does this come from?
It's inexplicable. It's much like what we talked about when we talked about Chris Watts, who killed his children and his wife. You don't understand why people do these types of things. There's a level that you don't even get into where it's just evil. But I think here, what you got is that they just were very narcissistic. All they cared about were themselves, and these people who are human beings were in the way. And they needed them out of the way. And if they could profit off of that, well, that worked out as well.
Yeah,
it was just kind of awful.
That's amazing. And we got a segment coming up here later on today that I think you're going to find fascinating about how the prison population will judge a guy like Winchester and a guy like Watts and a guy like Van Dyke, because there is that code of conduct. Gene Rossi, the prosecution obviously needs this witness. This is the witness that broke the case. Is there any level in your mind as to whether or not the prosecution should have entered into an agreement? Well, I mean, we know ultimately they won the case, but in the end, he's getting 20 years for not for the murder, but for this kidnapping, supposedly, of Denise Williams, which was what broke the case. And I want to ask you one last question, because you had 30 years in the DOJ. How many cases have you had where people who were cohorts in crime later on split off from one another, now had different interests, and wind up ratting the other one out?
Well, I couldn't really hear your last question, but I can talk about this guilty plea. And listen, I'm not the prosecutor down there, but I don't think I ever would have approved or offered the sweetheart deal that Brian Winchester got. I mean, he cold-bloodedly murdered Mike Williams, and he's getting a kidnapping charge, and he's pointing a finger at Denise Williams. I don't know if I could, in good conscience, have given him that offer. Now, if they had no evidence and the only way they could prove this case is by making that offer, so be it. But if they had a window of opportunity to give him a murder rap, he's got to take it and hope that the judge gives him some consideration. I got to add about his credibility. What Brian Winchester is doing, and probably the prosecutor told him this, don't blame everything on Denise Williams. You have to admit that I called her up and said, don't be wishy-washy, don't get cold feet. You can't blame her entirely, because you're the evil man here who went on that boat and killed your best friend.
Yes, agreed, Gene. Excellent points, guys, both of you. Listen, we have the admission that he actually makes from the witness stand with regard to the actual execution of the plan, which is the execution of one of his best friends, Mike Williams, in order to be extricated from that relationship so that he could be with Denise Williams. And it's about as simple as that, unfortunately, something that we can't wrap our minds around. We're going to go to break, and we're going to come back with Winchester's admission. Stay tuned for this, because it's pretty chilling. Gene Rossi, I think that this is one of the most compelling witnesses for the state, because it's confirming certain things. And let's not forget to tell our audience that 11 days after he disappears, now no one knows that this is a murder, no one knows what happened to the guy. 11 days later, Denise Williams is trying to collect on his life insurance policy. That's got to make you think. And while the rest of the family is out there holding out hope, I'm reading some things that I wrote down. The mom never believed he was eaten by an alligator, which was the story at the time. They wanted an investigation. She went to 2 governors at least. They went to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, posters, billboards, any attention they could get, TV shows, and then juxtapose that with Denise. 11 days later, getting a life insurance policy claims in. Not happy about the news article, talking about the victim and what the mother was doing. And she did not want to hear his name again because she needed to get on with her life. No bueno for the defendant, in my opinion.
We had a kidnapping resulting in murder. We couldn't find the body. Jay Lentz, L-E-N-T-Z. And after the murder, they put up posters, missing person. He went through the neighborhood and ripped the posters down. She's basically doing this. She doesn't want, this witness is devastating. I'm kind of exaggerating, but they could probably rest right now and just get a guilty verdict. This is awful. Now, I want to hear the other instance where she got mad. This is the first one. But this witness is fantastic.
Latonia, what do you think as a prosecutor? I mean, do you not believe that the prosecution is doing a very good job with this kind of witness and showing that Denise's actions are antithetical to somebody trying to find their loved one, as opposed to the mom and the family who would be doing something that common sense would tell you they would do, especially if you don't know what happened to the guy?
Very much so, and it's perfect for the jury to hear this, because the jurors are going to sit in that place and they're going to be thinking about this. A person who truly cares about their spouse, beloved spouse who's gone missing, would not want to not think about them anymore. They would want to try to find out all the answers. There are people whose spouses and family members who have gone missing 20 years in the making, and they still are looking for their spouses today because, you know what? Ultimately, they love that person. And here, Denise, thing she cared about was the money from the life insurance policies, and that goes through the jurors' minds. That's even more reason to think that she conspired for the killing of her husband.
Powerful witness. Latonia, Jean, I always tell my wife with regard to the life insurance policies that I have for her that I understand that someday if she ever collects on them, some guy's going to be drinking a pina colada on the beach on my dime. But at least, hey, listen, if my wife starts cashing in that policy 11 days after I disappear, I need you two guys to kind of help me out a little bit. But all kidding aside, listen, Nick, the brother here, is delivering compelling testimony that I think was probably, if you were going to talk to the jurors, a case cracker here for them moving towards the prosecution side, and may explain why the prosecution decided to put all their eggs in the Winchester basket and offer them that sweetheart deal, because in combination with this kind of evidence, it's pretty powerful against the defendant. But like every case, that is direct examination. There is a cross-examination. So let's listen to that, and we'll be back on the other end. We're in the Denise Williams murder case. That is Nick Williams, the brother of the victim, Mike Williams, delivering powerful testimony on direct examination. For the life of me, on this cross-examination, I'm not getting it. It's bringing sympathy to a mom. That's the victim's mom, who does not want to believe that her son is dead and that he can come walking through the door at any time, all the way up until 2017 when they found out ultimately that he was murdered. They're talking about Ainsley, the granddaughter, and that there was a need to protect her from that kind of false hope. I don't think they're scoring any points whatsoever. They're making him more sympathetic. But you know what? Mom is a key witness. Cheryl Williams is a key witness in the case. The poor mother. The clarion call, waiting out there like somebody, the women that used to in the old days with the lantern, waiting for the ships to come in, waiting for her poor son to come home because she just can't wrap her arms around it, desperately trying to get an investigation, desperately not believing that alligators ate him, but he was subject to foul play. And you know what? I guess it's a mom's instinct, because she was 100% correct. We're going to get to Cheryl Williams on the other end of this break. Stay with us. Yikes. I mean, that is out of Central Casting. Jean Rossi, this is brutal testimony for the defendant, consistent with the theme that Nick gave. She thought she was going to see her little baby granddaughter that she hasn't seen in months. Instead, she shows up with who? Brian Winchester, of all people. Who can imagine? Brian and I don't like the lies about us. And Brian starts to shout at her to shut her mouth and let her talk, referring to let Denise Williams talk, yelling at that poor woman who lost her son, for God's sakes. And they asked, basically, Denise asked to stop this investigation or you won't see Ainsley, her granddaughter, again. This is brutal.
Well, you know what else is brutal? There was an adopted admission in there. When you say something to a person that should cause a response, i.e., you killed my son, both Denise and Brian basically said, we're getting out of here. But the main thing is, this is the mom. I love those pigtails. She is a fantastic witness. I wish I had one of these in one of my many trials. This is very memorable. The jury is like shaking their head going, this is ridiculous. But the last thing I want to say is Brian Winchester should have been charged with murder. They should have given him life. This is premeditated, cold-blooded. You're preying on the emotions of the mother of the victim. That is horrible.
Latonia, your thoughts about the power of this kind of witness, and as a defense lawyer, I mean, like, what do you do in cross-examining such a sympathetic character?
You're very, very careful. Because of her age, because of her relationship as being the mother of the victim, you can't browbeat her, and you don't keep going over and over things trying to trip her up in her testimony. You get in and you get out with this. And I can tell you the prosecution, they had a wonderful witness in this woman. This is the grandmother talking about wanting to see her grandchild on her birthday. And you see this little lady up there and you think to yourself, the only way she's being held hostage. The only way she can see her grandchild is not to try to find information out about the disappearance of her own child. It's absolutely being able to do the juxtaposition between the people who really cared about the victim and the people who wanted harm to the, and that they didn't care and they just wanted the money from the result of his death. The prosecution is able to do a great job with that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that basically these two witnesses, in terms of jury psychology, if they were kind of on the fence with all the arguments the defense rightly makes about the motivation of Brian Winchester to do this and then to falsely accuse Denise Williams about this in order to get himself out of trouble, they kind of fall apart in the face of Nick Williams and Mom Cheryl Williams. They were great witnesses. Listen, we got to go to a break. We're going to be back on the other end. We got a lot of hot segments, breaking news that's even coming out while I've been on set here on this beautiful new set. I hope you guys like it. So stay tuned. Hang with us. We'll be back with more Law and Crime. Oh, man, oh, man, oh, man. Gene, these guys, these cops really did a crack job here. So let's get this down. So believe it or not, Denise is going to Kathy Thomas, whose husband was killed, because they had a friendship. They even had apparently some sort of menage a trois or whatever you call it, you know, these days at some point in time. She goes, Denise, to Kathy Thomas and says, go to Marcus, who is the father of Brian Winchester. Remember, he's in jail now because she alleged he attacked her. And have Marcus tell Brian, I'm not talking. Not good, right, Gene?
That's classic consciousness of guilt. That's better than a confession. That is better. I love these kinds of statements because it goes into the window of the soul of the defendant. And what's really compelling here is Kathy Thomas would want to be anywhere but sitting in that witness chair.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to hear the recorded call between Kathy Thomas and Denise Williams. That's going to be priceless.
Now, Latonia, as a prosecutor, what the government does is they then take Kathy, formerly Winchester, now Thomas, and convert her into a cooperating witness, i.e. an informant, and they mic her up and bring her into the orbit of Denise in order to try to drum up a conversation. What is the legality of that? Are they given instructions, and are there certain entrapment issues at play there?
Well, you just have to be careful, right? You're not trying to elicit any lies. You're not trying to make her become almost, for purposes of suppression, an operative of the state. She's going in there as an informant, and all she's supposed to do is be natural. If you get the information, this is what we're looking for, you do your conversation and see about if you're able to get it. But you're not supposed to try to do anything more than do that. And that's what happened in this situation.
Yeah, Latonia, I can't tell you how many times as a prosecutor myself, and I know you and Gene have had the same experience, that but for the intercepted conversations and the cooperating witness, we would not have had a case. We could not have put it together. The guilty verdict came from the mouth of the person during those recorded conversations. So this stuff is fascinating. Kathy Thomas is still on the stand. Let's take a listen and see if we can get to what Gene and Latonia are saying with regard to what actually occurred there, how she did it, and what was stated. Well, there you go. He's basically saying Brian Winchester is not to be believed, as we've been talking with our awesome guests. He's got a motive to lie. Don't put your eggs into his basket at all, and that you shouldn't compound the error the government made by a guilty verdict. But a verdict came nevertheless. Let's take a quick look.
He admitted he did.
All right, Gene Rossi, Latonia, let's go into this this scenario here with Kathy Thomas. She's given the statement that she was faking being served a subpoena, talking about her husband. She's trying to get Denise to speak, pretended that she knew something. She's kind of like really doing a good job teasing. I don't know if she was coached or not. Gene, what do you think? I mean, how do you prep? I think this is like really behind the scenes thing our audience are like, how do you prep a person on how they should get data out in these intercepts?
Well, we did that when I did my cases, and I had a cooperator like Kathy Thomas. I would give instructions to the agents, and then they would sit down with her and basically coach her as to how she raises issues, how she asks the questions, and they give her instructions on how to be someone who can elicit information. because that witness, that cooperator, is in fact an agent of the government when they make that recorded call. And that's why in some states that have a two-party law that you have to have both parties agree to the conversation being recorded, there's always a law enforcement exception. So that person is a law enforcement agent. And what she did was very clever. Under the Supreme Court, you can lie to a defendant, you can lie to a target to elicit information. So when she lied to Denise Williams and said, I was served with a subpoena, that's fine. The Supreme Court says you can do that if you are pursuing the truth from the target or the defendant.
Latonia, I want to ask you, at least when I was prosecutor, we were not allowed to have law enforcement do consensual intercepts unless the head county prosecutor, through my staff, actually approved it. Then there would be a logbook. They were very cautious, at least in New Jersey, of making sure that these were properly vetted and that they weren't being abused by law enforcement. Is it the same in your territory?
So it just matters, and yes, you're always going to go through whoever your head prosecutor is here, and we've got different. Even though we're here in Atlanta, there's 5 different metro counties, so every county's prosecutor or lead prosecutor might have a different way that they want things to go through. But usually it's going to go through whoever your head prosecutor is. What I find to be very interesting about this, and we haven't touched on it as much, Kathy Thomas herself is, I mean, the one thing that the prosecution can go about is she's the one person who has no interest in any of this, right? She, on some levels, is a bit of a victim herself, even though she was cheated on, she finds out. Her best friend's not really her best friend. So it's very interesting. She makes for a very interesting witness for the rest of the jurors when they're listening to her. So even though she's being kind of used by the prosecution, you can be able to say that she really doesn't have a bias at this point.
Right. Hey, Gene and Latonia, I want to ask you real quick. We got a short period of time, so some quick answers. Only 1 minute left. I think that when you add the statement she gave to the police where she was claiming to be a victim and she was very skittish about talking about she wanted nothing to do with the murder, add that to the brother Nick's testimony about the way Denise was acting or not acting, and then look at Mom when Mom gets up there. And I think the jury would have said if it was Brian Winchester alone, no way. But when you add all those pieces together, it confirmed what Brian Winchester was saying. What are your thoughts in 15 seconds or less?
Oh, I'll go first. Corroboration. Brian Winchester needed corroboration. Those witnesses and that evidence you just listed corroborated the word we. When he said we, then the jury believed it because you had witnesses that corroborated it.
Latonia, can you give it to me in 5 seconds or less?
Yes, you needed likable witnesses, somebody other than a convicted felon, to be somebody who would be able to corroborate and make this a better situation for the prosecution. And
absolutely. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Bob Bianchi. I got another hour with you, but it's jam-packed with special segments and special guests. Gene Rossi, my hashtag 4041. It is always an inestimable pleasure to be with you, sir, and I believe you will be back with me on Wednesday from at least 12 to 2 or 12 to 3. Thanks as always, Gene. You are the man.
See you later.
Give it to Rossi.
All righty, bye-bye.
Okay. Hey, guys, we're going to switch gears in a real hard turn. There's a reason why we're doing this today. We're going to go to Jason Van Dyke. Now, that is the cop cover-up trial. You remember him? He was the one who was previously convicted, and then 3 officers were charged with covering up the shooting of Laquan McDonald. Well, that case is concluded as well with guilty verdicts, and we're going to go into court, and we're going to watch the verdict, and then we're going to watch a motion that was made by the defense afterwards. But there's a reason why we're doing it, because we have a very special guest that's going to give you some insights that you will find in no other network, period, bar none, other than the Law and Crime Network. Let's take a look at the cop cover-up trial verdict.